Welcome to the Real Paranormal Stories podcast with your host, Christopher Buckner. Send your stories to realparanormalstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Royalty-free music provided by Kevin MacLeod and Tabletop Audio. And now, let's take a trip into the paranormal. This story comes from Reddit user Lock6. And this is their story. I was a teenager living alone in an apartment in the middle of a terrible neighborhood. There were drug dealers, gangs, prostitutes, addicts, and crazy people everywhere, including next door. And that was during the day. I tried to be home and stay home at night. I wasn't defenseless or dumb. I had been homeless before, managing to get this apartment, so I knew how to take care of myself. Still, being basically a kid, it was scary as hell for me at times. One night I was up late playing Zelda, just kind of hanging out, when someone banged on my door. It was after midnight and all of my lights were off. No one really knew that I lived there. I thought I was a wandering meth head. I peeked out the windows, which overlooked my front door, the courtyard for the apartment building, and every single other front door. Every apartment was dark, and there was no one in front of my door. And yet, bang, bang, more knocks, followed by a friendly male voice. "Hey, can you let me in? I just want to hang out." At this point, I was scared as fuck. It took me a minute to build up the courage, but I peeked through the curtains again, this time being careful to look down near the bottom of the door, in case someone was kneeling or even laying down. But there was no one there. And yet the knocks continued all night. Usually he would sound friendly and ask me random things like, "Do you have kids? I have toys they can play with." And, "I have some food here if you're hungry." A few times the tone got a bit more sinister, saying things like, "I know you're in there," and, "I don't know why you're making this so hard. I'm your friend." I didn't have a phone, and didn't have anyone I could call anyway, except the cops who I deeply mistrusted. I could have snuck out the back window and made a run for it, but it was a bad neighborhood in the middle of the night. It seemed like the more dangerous option. And lastly, the man never actually tried to break in. All I could do was sit there all night, listening to him talk and bang on the door, hoping he'd go away. I continued to peek out my front window and other windows in the apartment, but I never saw him. He eventually did go away as the sun began to rise, probably around 5 a.m. I spent several months in that apartment. He never came back, but I never found out who or what he was. And that is their story. This story comes from Reddit user double_chard_8733. And this is their story. I used to work as a bartender on a military base, and one of the most memorable nights was Halloween. We had gone all out on decorations, including a skeleton perched on a barrel. Whenever someone passed by, it would giggle and pretend to pour a bottle down its throat while spouting pirate sayings. One eerie night, as I was closing up the bar all by myself, I switched off the decorations and locked all the doors. Just when I thought everything was in order, a strange sensation made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Startled, I turned around, prompted by the sound of someone clearing their throat. That's when things took a bizarre turn. The skeleton suddenly sprang to life, as if someone had just walked past it. I was perplexed because I knew I had turned it off, and there was no one else in the bar. I decided to investigate and found the switch in the off position, which left me baffled. Without giving it much thought, I removed the batteries and stashed them in my pocket. While counting down the till, an unsettling feeling of being watched crept over me. Finally, done with my tasks, I was ready to leave for home. However, just as I approached the employee exit, I heard the pirate skeleton's eerie laughter once again. Without a second thought, I bolted to my car. And that is their story. That's all for this episode of the Real Paranormal Stories podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review anywhere this podcast can be found.